goddess of the hunt and twin sister of Apollo. Artemis was a deadly archer, watching over hunters and ensuring that nature was kept in check. A goddess of the moon and one of three virgin goddesses alongside Athena and Hestia, Artemis was quick to anger, protecting her chastity by any means possible. When the hunter Actaeon, a grandson of Cadmus, accidentally stumbled upon her as she lay bathing in the forest, the goddess was quick to punish him. Turning Actaeon into a deer, she would set his 50 hunting dogs upon him, with the hunter suffering a horrific and painful death for his mistake. Poseidon, brother of Zeus, ruled the seas from his magnificent palace beneath the waves. Known as the Earth Shaker, Poseidon would create earthquakes, traveling across the oceans in his golden chariot, with him stirring and calming the waters with his famous trident. One of his harshest punishments would be inflicted upon Minos, the king of Crete, after Minos refused to sacrifice his best bull to Poseidon. The god would curse Minos' wife to fall in love with the beast, which eventually led to the birth of the half-man, half-bull creature known as the Minotaur. But while he usually kept to his own domain in the seas, Poseidon would grow tired of Zeus' rule on Olympus. Alongside Athena, Hera, and Apollo, Poseidon would attempt to dethrone Zeus, but the rebellion would ultimately fail. Zeus would punish Poseidon and Apollo by sending them to serve King Laomedon of Troy, where they would spend an entire year building the city's giant and famous walls that would later have to withstand the force of Greece's mightiest armies during the Trojan War. Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom and the child of Zeus and Metis, was known for her love of strategists and cunning heroes, helping many of them on their great quests. But she was also a proud goddess, and to stake her claim on the world, she decided to compete for patronage of a great city in eastern Greece, which was yet to be named. Competing against her uncle Poseidon, the two would attempt to give the city the best gift. Poseidon would strike the ground with his trident, making a stream of water rise up for all to see. But as the water was salty, it could not be used to tend the land, with the city's inhabitants unimpressed. But Athena, wanting to gift the city something they had never seen before, would place the palm of her hand on the earth, with the first olive tree emerging. Not only would it feed the people of the land, but it would also have many uses, with the oil it produced in cooking, medicine, perfume, candles, and athletics, bringing numerous benefits to the ancient world. With Poseidon hanging his head in shame, the gods would deem Athena victorious, with the city taking her name and becoming known as Athens, the capital of Greece and one of the most important cities of its era. The inventor of mathematics, Athena also had a fondness for music, inventing the trumpet and flute, as well as being the patron of artists and craftsmen. She was particularly proud of her skill in weaving, although this would bring her into conflict with a young girl from Libya named Arachne. Highly skilled in the craft, Arachne would boast she was the greatest weaver to ever live, challenging Athena to a competition. They would each produce a tapestry of the gods, with the person that demonstrated the most skill being crowned victorious. The two would weave furiously for hours until finally both pieces were complete. But to Athena's surprise, Arachne's was far better than her own. Furious, she struck Arachne on the head again and again until she dropped to the floor. But rather than kill her, Athena transformed the girl into the first spider, where she would use her talents to weave beautiful webs, with the creatures known as arachnids taking her name. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was born from the genitals of Uranus, making her the oldest of the Olympians. A mischievous god, she would use her powers for her own amusement, making Zeus sleep with mortal women, so he would have to face the anger of Hera. Responsible for sexual attraction in both mortals and the gods alike, she would often be accompanied by Eros, known to the Romans as Cupid, whose arrows could charm any creature, with the two striking love into the hearts of unsuspecting mortals across the world. For one man in particular, Eros shot many arrows into the hearts of potential lovers who found themselves attracted to a beautiful young man who went by the name of Narcissus. While he was blessed with great beauty, he was also burdened by vanity and arrogance, taking pleasure in cruelly rejecting the advances of the many women who pursued him. But soon he would cross paths with the nymph Echo. Cursed by Hera after she became the object of Zeus' affections, Echo was unable to use her voice except to copy the words of others. Echo had been in love with Narcissus for some time, but when she finally found the courage to approach him, all she could do was repeat what he said. Unamused, Narcissus would cruelly reject her too, and in doing so would crush her spirit. In her grief, she would slowly waste away until only her voice remained, a voice that can still be heard today as Echo repeats our words back to us. But Echo would not go unavenged, as Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance, had been watching. When Narcissus next bent down to drink from a lake, he would finally find the one he loved. Yet it was not a woman, but instead his own reflection. Mesmerized, he stared deeply into his own eyes, unable to turn away. For weeks he stayed by the pool, gazing at his own reflection, until finally he could endure it no more. Realizing he would never be with anyone as beautiful as himself, he would take a dagger and plunge it into his heart. From where his blood touched the earth would bloom a beautiful flower, the first Narcissus, with the word narcissist stemming from his story. But while some, like Narcissus, would become lost in the depths of love, others would seek endlessly to find it. One such man, Pygmalion, was a great artist from the island of Cyprus, but after many years of unlucky love, he had given up on women entirely, resigning himself to a life of solitude and instead focusing all his attention into his art. Beginning work on a new statue, Pygmalion would labor day after day, till the figure of a woman would begin to appear before him. Working harder than he ever had before, Pygmalion would spend hours chiseling the most intricate of details into his woman of stone, shaping her slender face and carving out each lock of hair, until finally his masterpiece was complete. As he stepped back to admire his work, Pygmalion was struck by the beauty of his creation. Never before had he seen a more perfect statue, nor even a real woman, who could match what he saw before him. Spending hours holding the statue's stone hands and kissing its cold and lifeless lips, Pygmalion would grow ever sadder and more lonely, as he realized that he would never find a woman he loved more than the one he had carved from stone. Spending night after night in the workshop, Pygmalion would pray to the gods to bless him with a woman as perfect as his statue. But as he prayed, the stone figure behind him would begin to transform. Its cold and lifeless hair would turn into long and flowing locks, while its gray and cracked skin would soften and become warm to the touch. Looking up in surprise, Pygmalion would be shocked to see a face smiling back at him, not one of stone, but one of flesh and blood. Always happy to help those seeking love, Aphrodite had answered his prayers, with the once lifeless statue introducing herself as Galatea, before stepping down from her pedestal and embracing Pygmalion with open arms. His years of loneliness and isolation finally over. But while Aphrodite took joy in helping young couples find love, she was also a vain and jealous goddess, and would take revenge against those who stole the spotlight away from her. Such was the case with the Greek princess Psyche, a mortal woman who was so beautiful that it was said she surpassed the goddess of love herself. With men from every corner of the earth coming to gaze upon Psyche, they would soon forget about Aphrodite entirely, with her altars becoming neglected and her temples falling to ruin. Furious that none were paying her attention, Aphrodite would call upon her companion Eros, demanding that he use his powers to make Psyche fall in love with the most vile and despicable man on the face of the earth. But when Eros went to carry out her instructions, he too would be struck by Psyche's beauty, falling deeply in love and for the first time refusing to follow Aphrodite's commands. However, as Eros would now refuse to strike any man with love for Psyche, she would grow sadder and more lonely as the years went on, before finally turning to the Oracle of Delphi for help. Following the oracle's instructions, Psyche would travel to a magnificent palace where it was said her husband would come to claim her. But upon arriving, the palace's servants would warn Psyche that her new husband was a secretive man and would only visit her in the dark of night, with her never allowed to ask for his identity, nor seek to look upon his face. Overjoyed with her new life, Psyche would spend every day in the palace's beautiful gardens. But one day, Psyche would be overcome by her curiosity, taking an oil lamp and lighting it in the early hours of the morning. Looking down, she would be overcome with joy, as her husband was none other than Eros, the young and handsome god of love. However, in her excitement, Psyche would lose her grip on the lamp, with the hot oil falling down onto Eros's shoulder, causing the god to wake up in fright. Disappointed that Psyche had failed to keep her trust in him, Eros would tell her that the marriage was over, before flying back to Mount Olympus. Distraught at the loss of her husband, Psyche would visit Aphrodite, begging the goddess for a chance to see Eros once again. But Aphrodite had not forgotten her hatred for the girl who had stolen the world's attention away from her. And so when Psyche arrived to beg at the foot of her throne, Aphrodite would laugh in delight, setting the girl an impossible task. If she wanted to see her husband again, Psyche would have to travel to the underworld and ask Persephone, the queen of the dead, to place a fragment of her beauty within a golden box. Traveling to the underworld, Psyche would come to the river Styx, and after paying Charon's fee, would be ferried across its dark and haunting waters. Arriving in the throne room of Hades and Persephone, Psyche would approach the queen of the dead, who was happy to give her assistance, placing a fragment of her beauty within the golden box. But as Psyche again began the trip back to Olympus, she would become overwhelmed by curiosity once again, lifting up the lid of the golden box and taking a look at the fragment of Persephone's beauty contained within. But such things were not meant for mortal eyes. With Psyche falling to the ground and being enveloped by a dark and endless sleep, it was at this moment that Eros, moved by the lengths Psyche had gone to find him, would fly down to earth and use one of his arrows to save her from the grip of eternal sleep. Returning to Olympus, Zeus would arrange for them a great wedding celebration where he would grant the gift of immortality. And so it was that Psyche, whose name means soul, would become a goddess. In her union with Eros, love and soul would now be forever linked, with their child Hedon, the goddess of pleasure, bringing joy to mortals across the earth.